Okay, so one difference in this build is, again, we're using the same processor as before, but instead of using the stock heatsink that comes with this, we have this giant, let me show you the box here, CoolerMaster Hyper 212 Plus cooler. So I'm going to show you how to install this. Before we do, we have to install the CPU into the motherboard though. So let me open that up here. And we'll install that real quickly just like we did in the previous build. So I'm not going to go through all of the explanation like I did last time. We're just going to do it. So again, here is the processor in the box and here is the heatsink. We need the processor part. So I'm just going to not use this heatsink that comes with it though. So this is the very small heatsink that we used last time. It does an adequate job of removing heat, but just compare the size of these two heatsinks. Let me show you the difference in the thickness here and the height. And so this CoolerMaster heatsink is going to do quite a much better job of dissipating heat. So remember, this small heatsink would sit right here and dissipate heat. This one is going to do the same thing, but much, much better. So we don't need this. We're just going to set it aside. We're going to install the processor, though. And just like before, make sure you don't touch the top of the processor or the bottom of the processor with the pins. You have to handle it by the sides. That's why it's in this little plastic case. So open up the clamshell. Just like before, remember there's always this little arrow here, and that little arrow is going to go in this bottom left corner here. And you can see the arrow, if you look on this plastic cover, little triangular arrow goes right there. So, pop open this little arm, pop it in gently. Wiggle it around and make sure it's set in there nicely. That's in there good. Pull this down and then as you pull the spring arm down, the cap will pop off. Ta-da! And you can do away with that cap. Now that the processor's in here, the fun begins. Instead of last time, we just oriented this and we popped the feet in. These aftermarket coolers are a little more involved. They're a lot heavier, and so in order to get these to stay on here, we're going to have to install a metallic back plate underneath. So let me just go ahead and show you rather than talk about it. The first thing we want to do is pop this fan off to make installing it a little bit easier. So it holds on with these little plastic clips. So just pop them off of one side, and we'll set the fan aside for just a minute. The second thing you want to do is there's a little plastic film on the bottom to keep that clean and keep it from corroding. So you want to peel this off, but again, don't touch it. You don't want to get fingerprints or anything else on there. You just set this down. Now there's no thermal paste on this surface as you need to make a good contact between a heatsink and the processor. With this cooler, CoolerMaster provides you with a little syringe of thermal grease. So what you want to do is just put a little tiny bit of this on the surface, and basically what you want to picture is the little silver part of the processor. You're going to want to have that covered. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of evenly smear a little bit of this on there. You don't want a whole lot, but if you put in a little bit too much, it'll kind of smear out of the edges. Just a little even coating here, and I'm going to smear it around a little bit with the top. And I probably might have even a tiny bit too much on here, so I'm just going to smear it around. You probably don't want to use the entire tube, is what I'm trying to say here. Because too much actually will not do the right job of just transmitting the heat there. Alright, let me make sure I've got it everywhere though. All over the surface. Alright, I think I need a little bit more right over here. Okay. That's probably too much, but I'm just letting you know. Put the cap back on there. Now, the next step in the instructions says we want to install the back plate here. So, this is the back plate, and the instructions say, do not remove the do not remove the insulating tape. And the insulating tape that they're referring to, I'm not able to keep that up, are just on these little 4 feet there. So what we want to do is set that down. What we want to do is use these 4 little feet. These 4 little feet are going to go through to the back side, and then we're going to use these nuts to screw them on there. So let me pop one of these through one of the 4 holes that surrounds the processor. And this plate could go one of 2 ways. You want these insulating feet, the insulating tape, to go against the back side of the motherboard. On this back plate, there are 3 different positions where the screw could go through, depending on what kind of processor you have. With the i5-3570K, it says you want the screw to go through the middle possible location right there. So it could go on this end, in the middle, or on the outside. So it says to put it through the middle is the proper placement. Let me put a couple of more of these feet through to hold this in place in the right place, and then we will put on these nuts. Okay, so again, going through the middle there, and it comes with 4 nuts to hold this back plate on. So this is to distribute the weight of this very heavy cooler. Alright, so we've got 2 of those on. And I'm just tightening them up with my fingers now, and I'll use a screwdriver in a minute to tighten these up further. And you do want to tighten this up quite a bit, because otherwise this is going to loosen up with all the vibration of the fans and it'll start rattling eventually. Alright, one last foot. There we go. And I seem to have lost my nut. There it is. Alright. Alright, now also one thing that's included in the package here is this little tool, and this little tool is designed to set on top of these feet, and then you can use a screwdriver to stick in there to tighten the feet up. So that's what I'm doing right now. Alright, just do all 4 of those just that same way. And I'm kind of holding the nut from behind to help it tighten up. Alright. And you don't want to be like me. You want to not slip with your screwdriver. Alright, and one more foot. probably just as easily or more easily use a nut driver for this job. Alright, that's going to give us a solid foundation to put this monster on. So, next step, you have this little X brace here. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this heatsink on top of the processor. And again, this is something you only want to do one time, and one time only, because you don't want to smear the grease around and then have to move it and redo this. So you want to figure out exactly how you want this to go on. What we figured out was putting it this direction with the fan blowing back toward the back of the case is probably going to make the most sense. So let me set this on here. I'm trying to get it nice and centered. Alright. And now we're going to use this brace to hold it on. So let me slide this through. Whoop, I almost put it on upside down. So you want to make sure that these screws are pointed down when you slide this through. Okay. Slide it through here. Try not to move that around very much. In that little center pin, there's a hole in the top of the heatsink that we want that to go in. Okay. So I have to just slide this back a little bit to get it in the holes. Okay. So we've got 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to make sure they're lined up perfectly in those little screw holes. Alright, and then now I'm going to screw those in. And I've never used quite this kind of mechanism before, so hopefully I am doing this the right way. Alrighty. And I'm kind of anticipating that this is going to pop down at some point also. Let's see. Alright, that's pretty tight there. And my screw. Then let's see if this thing feels stable here. Good and tight. Let's go around one more time to make sure that all those are pretty tight. And let's see if this thing feels stable. That's good and stable. I don't think that's going anywhere. And so the last step, I think, is just snapping that fan back on. Right there. But I think I'm going to wait on that a little bit just because this thing is so enormous. Also, before we put that fan back on, we're probably going to want to put the memory in. So I'm going to leave that off until we actually get this installed in there. One last step let me just do while we're in this section, and it'll only take a second here. Let me go ahead and pop the RAM in. to the motherboard. But if all you were interested in seeing was that heatsink installed, then you're done. So here are two 8GB Corsair Vengeance sticks of RAM. And let's just pop those in. And just one more time, like I mentioned last time, in a motherboard like this, you have 4 slots that you can put RAM. If you're only using 2 sticks, make sure to put them in the same color. And so we have 2 blue and 2 black. I'm going to put them in the 2 blue slots because I want these to be as far away from that heatsink as possible, because this fan is going to be covering them up. And actually these might be a little bit too tall to do as we had planned. But we will see what happens, because this heatsink on the RAM is quite large. We might have to end up modifying that a little bit. So push down until that snaps. And then we'll be back with the next section in just a moment.